Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Kooler Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kuehlhorn, and I'm excited to have you join me as I interview community members and business leaders from the communities in which I live, work, and serve through my business Kooler Garage Doors. We're going to bring you highlights on characters in our communities. Why? Because community matters, and I want to know more about who is behind our business and leadership in order to understand and support the community fabric that our relationships make up. Join me twice a month as we dive into getting to know each other better, and collectively, we can build stronger communities that support our lifestyles, our youth, and our health. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Matt Kuehlhorn with the Kooler Lifestyle Podcast. Today, I have a guest, John Norton, who I'm very excited to talk with. John came into our valley in the Gunnison Valley in 1985 to work with CBMR. He then went to Aspen in 91, ended up running the ski areas there, and returned to our valley in 2002 when our ski area was struggling, and he saved it in a lot of ways. He ended up selling to the Muellers in 2004, established a corporate interventionist consulting company, and in late 2015, he was asked to step in as temporary head of the Tourism Association during a reconstructure, and the new board asked that he stay on. The rest is more or less history there. John and his wife, Robin, have been active in the community. They established the Physically Challenged Ski Program, now the Adaptive Sports, which I worked with for many, many years. Robin was the first ED there, and Robin was a prime mover in establishing the CBPTA. John's been very active in partners. They raised 3 girls here and are still passionate about skiing, whitewater kayaking, fly fishing, and mountain biking. John, it's a pleasure to have you here this morning.
It's good to see you, Matt. Glad to be here.
Yeah. As I understand, you're at your home office just off of Cement Creek Road.
That's right.
Love it. It's a beautiful spot down there.
It's a beautiful spot. It's a great house. You helped with it, so thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we'll talk about your garage doors because they are super unique. And that was when I was installing. I got in trouble for like over lubricating the springs and having that drip onto your concrete pad.
I
I remember
always,
that.
hey, it's a garage. But when people ask to see the house, I always brag on the garage doors most. I just love the
It's awesome.
garage.
Yeah, the garage is a cool spot. John, where'd you grow up and how did this form who you are today?
I grew up in the city of Pittsburgh, and I am the product of the Catholic school system there. Uh, I was taught by nuns and brothers during all my formative years. Grew up in a big Catholic neighborhood, and I the leave behinds there are the value of hard work, and to the best of my ability, reflecting on trying to make moral judgments almost all the time. I'm not always successful, but I try. And the nuns were tough, and the brothers were tough, and but they also taught the value of prayer and daily gratitude for all the things we have. And I try and reflect on that stuff every day. So no complaints about my upbringing. I could have complained about some things at the time, as we all did in our Catholic schools, but that's so far in the rearview mirror. I got so much more out of my primary and secondary education and the Catholic upbringing than I can't find anything to complain about now.
Yeah. In Pittsburgh, like that is considered to be in the Rust Belt. Is that correct?
Yeah, and although Pittsburgh got saved, and I'm kind of I'm surprised, uh, but when I was growing up, and it had a lot to do with why I went to college where I went, and how I ended up here. Pittsburgh was still plenty filthy. The mills were going, the barges were active. We were an industrial city with an industrial base. And, there are pictures during the war years and for years to come where if you're driving somewhere, you had your headlights on 24 hours a day. and the streetlights in Pittsburgh were on 24 hours a day because the sky was so full of soot. Um, but community leaders in the late 70s, early 80s, when all the mines closed, got together and they turned Pittsburgh into kind of a medical and scientific mecca. And it's where Elon Musk is testing his, driverless cars with the help of Carnegie Mellon University. It's the regional hub now for Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Ohio, West Virginia, in terms of the medical complexes there. The University of Pittsburgh still does well. So Pittsburgh actually recovered, where Youngstown, Ohio, Gary, Indiana, parts of Chicago have not. And it was through community leadership in the private industry, really working with elected officials, that did that. I do miss some of the grit of old Pittsburgh. And those were, there was terrible angst. I used to be a paper boy, morning paper boy for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and a guy that uh, uh, followed me by several paper boys actually stole money from my mom once. And I was just shocked, because that never would have happened when, I grew up in a neighborhood where if anybody saw you doing something wrong, your parents were going to hear about it, before you had a chance to get home. And the fact that this guy stole from my mother, that was some of the bad stuff that happened in Pittsburgh during the transition. But the transition happened not without pain, but it's a pretty good place to live now, and I enjoy, going home.
Very cool.
And I'm
Well, this
still
is
a
short.
Steelers fan.
Yeah.
this, this
Love
isn't
it.
the, this isn't the greatest year to be a Steelers fan, but I think it's your born on team, and I and all my friends from growing up, many of whom don't live in Pittsburgh, still bleed the black and gold.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I started my formative years in Chicago, and the 1987 Bears I'll never forget. So I can't leave the Bears too far.
Yeah, the fridge.
Yep, that's right. So John, what's the so you came to this valley in 1985 between Pittsburgh and here. What's a concise story about line that
Well,
throws it
so
together?
I ended up going to Dartmouth, and I was a good student in high school and had the opportunity to go to a number of different schools. I chose Dartmouth because I was so tired of the filth of Pittsburgh. I wanted to get out in the woods in the most beautiful place that I knew of. And I never really looked west. I mean, back in, I guess I graduated high school in 1973. Uh, I didn't know anything. I knew something about the Western United States, but it wasn't the type of thing. It's like, oh, I'll go to CU Boulder. I'd never even heard of it. And so, my eyes were turned east. Anyway, I ended up Dartmouth. I met Robin there, my wife. She was a ski racer. I was not. And I learned to ski a bit at Dartmouth. I learned to enjoy whitewater a bit at Dartmouth. I learned to fish a bit at Dartmouth. Mountain biking hadn't been invented then. And um, I spent some time in the Marines, and then I went to work for Procter and Gamble, and I was in New York City when Crested Butte reached out, and because of Robin's uh, uh, skiing background, so she was a NCAA, alpine skier. Her best event was the downhill. She had coached the Eastern Junior National team when we were getting married, and so just a huge ski background for her. When we had the opportunity to come out here, she said, "Let's go." Even though we had two kids, and Robin was pregnant with our third at the time, and we never looked back. I we both just love the mountains and love this valley.
Love that. And you've been a part of TAP for a number of years through multiple transitions.
Yeah.
Um, TAP's an acronym. How would you define TAP today?
Yeah, well, so it's been 6 years, right? And it was the Tourism Association. We'd refer to it as the TA. And then the commissioners, I think 3 or 4 years ago, because we were doing so well, we were growing our revenues, which is our revenues come from a 4% tax on commercial lodging. So no one in the valley pays anything into TAP, but all our guests do. And uh, the the commissioners at the time, it was, I think, John Messner leading the charge, but Jonathan was on the commission then, and I think Phil Chamberlain asked us to help Western if we could, because Western's so important. And they kind of threw that in the economic development bucket, which the TA is allowed to spend money on economic development. And then to focus on economic development, we ended up with the ICE Lab. And uh, those are, and of course we still market the valley, but we were no longer the tourism association, right? We spend half our money and our resources and our brain power on the ICE Lab, on Western, on sustainable tourism and outdoor recreation, and the other half is in what I'd call traditional marketing activities.
And we just had a proposal on the ballot for 6A, which my basic understanding allows an altercation of funds to be able to focus on various priorities. Is that correct?
Yes, so the we had restricted funds by the state uh, prior to next year, and those, we were playing within the lines of what the state said we could spend, and the commissioners, actually, I think it was Jonathan Houck and Liz Smith, went to the state and said, let's see if we can pass through the state House and Senate and get the governor to sign a bill to allow other uses for local marketing district funds, and also other uh, tourism related funding, tax funding that is around the state. And that passed. And so what just passed here is that the commissioners will be able to spend 40% of our funds to help affordable housing and to help childcare and daycare activities. So those are clearly important efforts in the Valley now. We certainly need more affordable housing than we have. We're past the childcare age with our kids, but I understand, talking to people, that childcare is very important to people. It's always been important to people, but now it's just tougher to get your kid in childcare. And so, our LMD monies, our TAP funds, will go to other worthwhile ventures to the degree the commissioners want to spend on that.
Yeah, gotcha. I want to bounce back a little bit. What did you study at
Uh, I was religion and philosophy at Dartmouth, and then throw some physics in there. And then I actually did some graduate work in mathematics at the University of Virginia and the University of Georgia. So I've got
Interesting.
some combination of science and mathematics, and uh, pretty steeped in religion and philosophy. And I'll actually be teaching at the Rady School of Engineering with David Assad, who runs the ICE Lab. This second semester this year, we're going to be teaching the opportunities presented by entrepreneurism to interested engineering undergrads, and hopefully get some of those kids interested in becoming entrepreneurs and then staying in the Valley and establishing companies here, which is what the ICE Lab is all about.
Yeah. Okay, so where's the thread? I'm trying to spin a connection. Philosophy, math, religion. You've been a silent mentor of mine for a bit now, and we've talked a little bit, especially as I've gotten into involvement with chamber and other community building organizations. And I've always considered you an entrepreneurial mind, a bit of a change agent. And I guess my question, like, do you see yourself that way? And where does the spark for business and entrepreneurialism come from?
Yeah, I do think I'm a change agent, and most people don't like change, and I thrive on it and a new challenge. And so, there's really, so from religion and philosophy to the Marine Corps, that's a pretty big change. And then from big business, Procter and Gamble, and right before I was, came to the Valley to work for this little ski company, I was, consulting with Pepsi and Seagram's and Anheuser-Busch on how they could respectively sell more booze, sell more soda pop, and sell more beer. And it's a pretty abrupt switch, from the very biggest of America's companies to then end up with a little ski area. And that was a big change. And I obviously was able to carry some of the things I learned at P&G, to CBMR, and then over to Aspen. And then, it was a very big change, so when I left the Mullers, people and started consulting, people assumed I was consulting in the resort and tourism field, and I wasn't at all. I was again working with big business, so companies like the Hartford and some Berkshire Hathaway companies and some finance companies in this corporate intervention world, which I had to do a couple times at Aspen and at CBMR, and I found it very interesting. And it's like, how do you change? How do you actually get an organization with, in Aspen's case, 5,000 people, 5,000 employees, to really take a step change in the way we do business? And it's not easy, but it's hugely fascinating to me. And so was what I was doing in consulting. And honestly, in 2000, the end of 15, when I was asked to step in and just kind of keep the lights on at the TA until a new board could be appointed. And, I thought that was going to be truly a temporary, a multi-month position. I remember, I think it was in March or April at our board meeting, that I didn't sense the new board had a search going on for my replacement. And I said to them, I said, can I help? I have some suggestions. I'd be glad to, I'd be glad to help you guys find my replacement. And they said, nah, how about, would you consider staying on? And the reason they said that, I think, it was, I had spent the winter, so my first 3 or 4 months at the TA wasn't working well, right? So from 2003, when it was established, to 2015, revenues really hadn't grown. And, when I took over in, let's call it January of 16, winter was already written. You don't start winter in January, but summer hadn't started yet. And I started researching pretty heavily what I thought might be the solution to our lack of growth. And I concluded it probably would have been mountain biking. We've got the best trail network in the world, at least in the country. It was a growing sport. Mountain biking at that time had just passed road biking in hard goods sales. It was part of our culture. And we didn't talk much about it. At that time, the top 5 places, somewhere in the media, you might read a story about the top 5 places to go in Colorado to mountain bike. And we may or may not have been on that list at that time. It's kind of amazing. It was Durango, often Winter Park, maybe Breckenridge, maybe Steamboat, Salida. which was just wrong. I mean, we already had a better product than those guys. We had never talked about it. Um, and I think the board, so I said to the board, I said, we ought to put all our chips on mountain biking and see how that plays out. But I think that could be the answer to our kind of stagnation. And so when the board said they'd like me to stay, it with the second part of that was uh, was okay. Don't you want to see this mountain biking thing through? And they also asked what happens if mountain bike doesn't work. And I said, well, if mountain biking doesn't work, then we'll change, quickly. But I think it's going to work. And so it was the opportunity to see mountain biking through that kept me at the TA initially.
Cool. And as a change agent, I mean, I think it's fairly obvious to most everybody that's in this valley, there's significant change occurring now. And that might have been, in development and just fuel added to the fire through COVID and people wanting to exit larger towns and find a community like ours that has more outdoor venues and opportunities. With the amount of change that's occurring in the valley, what are you seeing? What are you getting excited for, over the next few years, and what might be some potential challenges that arise with this?
Well, I'm excited to see how some of our historic funding could be used to spur the development of more housing, right? So we need it. And
Yeah.
we've got, Dick Bratton's Gunnison Rising sitting there, and I'm anxious to see that begin to flourish. Um, Dick's still pretty healthy. I hope he's around long enough to see certainly not all of that through, but some of that through. I'm excited about the CB South to CB Trail, and and bicycles as not only a great recreation and a great sport, but as a way to get around. I'm excited about CBMR hopefully and Vail Resorts spending some money on the mountain. I hope we see TO2 come to fruition someday. I hope I'm still ambulatory so that I could ski TO2. I have done it. But obviously it's not open to the public, and it would just be fantastic terrain. It would make a real big difference in the mountain. And I'll say, I said like focusing on mountain biking was very important this summer. Focusing on extreme skiing is also very important. And when Vail bought, so if you think about the late 80s when we put the North Face lift in, I had been bugging the Callaways and the Waltons to put a lift in the North Face. And I think Ralph Walton got so tired of hearing me say that he said, look, if you want the North Face to be built, take it out of your marketing budget and build it yourself. And I looked, and I think our marketing budget at that time was about $1 million, maybe $1.2 million. And the North Face was going to be $650 to put it in. That lists were much cheaper back then. And I thought about that for a couple hours, and I went back to Ralph and I said, I'll do it. And he was kind of shocked. He did not expect that answer because marketing guys don't give up their marketing budgets. And I said, no, I think the publicity around the North Face, and it's just when extreme skiing was starting to happen, will be so significant that it'll dwarf whatever I could have spent that $650,000 on. And it was right. And so we grew like crazy. That's how I ended up over in Aspen, is we were so successful here at Crested Butte. The ski industry across the country was looking at Crested Butte as the innovator. We focused on, we obviously had the Extreme Ski Championships. We had that great reunion this winter where so many former champions came back in a celebration of all the things we did in the 80s and early 90s. And that worked like a charm. When I left, and this is a story about focus, the mountain went back to kind of talking about intermediate skiing and families. and it started falling apart. And I don't know why the mountain left the extreme. Obviously, kind of the extreme adventure skier is a small fraction of the alpine ski market, but it's one that we're uniquely attractive to. And in terms of intermediate skiing, we've got Snowmass and Keystone and Vail and Steamboat, and we're just, it would be like me getting in the ring with Muhammad Ali. It's just not going to work. We can't lead with intermediate skiing, although we have some. And so when I came back, we started talking about the extremes again. That was in 02. The Mullers came in. They said, no, we're intermediate. Because the market's so big for intermediate. That didn't work again for the second time. And then Vail came in. I'll give Vail a lot of credit for this. They came in and I said, we're selling two different products, the TA and the Skiria. We're talking about the extremes and the adventure skiing that's here that is fabulous. And the mountain is talking about intermediate skiing and blue skies, and it's not working. And after a year, Vail is very careful in its decision making, didn't jump to it, but they said, you're right. And now we're on the same page. And I think that's why we're seeing the growth in the alpine skiing product, is because we're selling a wild place that's out of the way, that's harder to get to. And we're not afraid to say that. And we never should be. Someone said, yeah, you're kind of harder. I was flying home with a guy, my seat, I wasn't with him, but I was talking to him. He was landing in Denver. And I said, are you home? And he said, yeah, I've got to go to Evergreen or wherever he was going. And he said, how about you? And I said, no, I got to catch another flight to Gunnison. And he said, oh, you poor guy. I think we'd flown in from New York. And so you always like your flights to be ending. And he said, oh, you poor guy. And I said, well, you can say that, but when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to be in Crested Butte. And he went, oh, that's a good point. And, it harder to get to, but worth it, because, you get a sense of being away from it all when you're in this valley. And so we can lead, when people say, geez, Crested Butte's hard to get to, I say, you're right. And if it wasn't hard to get to, it wouldn't be Crested Butte. And it wouldn't be Gunnison. And so, if that's cool to you, well, come on. And if you default into an easy place to get to, then go there. And that works. It works with a lot of people because, as you know, we're more crowded now. But the focus on mountain biking and extreme skiing is what has led to our success these last 4 or 5 years. Do we have fun whitewater? Yeah, we do, but we're not the Arkansas Valley. And we truly have great fly fishing, and talking to the guys and stuff like that, we're full enough. But we spend a lot of time on our website talking about how terrific the fly fishing is. And we give a nod to our Nordic skiing too, but it's the adventure extreme skiing and the mountain biking that makes this place competitive in a world that's very competitive.
Yeah, I hear all that, and I love that. My takeaways are to know who you are, right? And this is for personal and business. But then that focus is so key.
Yeah. And, people's minds are cluttered. Mine is too. There's something called decision fatigue, right? And it's when you're just presented with too many options. And there's a Steve Jobs story. So Steve Jobs gets asked to come back to Apple, just kind of like I was asked to come back to Crested Butte, and happy to, because Apple was struggling in his absence. And Apple had 30 or 40 computers. Even Steve couldn't tell the difference between all the computers. And he, eliminated all but a couple or three, and then started to build the company from there. And as a valley, if we're going to, and it's all true, Oh, we've got whitewater, we've got fishing, we've got lake fishing, we've got boating, we've got flowers, we've got trails, and all of a sudden, someone trying to make a decision on that, their head explodes. There's too much to consider. Even though everything we said is true, you got to figure out what you're going to focus on, and and in a landscape, in a media landscape that's just overloaded with information and consumer messages.
That's right. Awesome. All right. So starting to put pigtails on this conversation, John, a couple of final questions for you. One is, um, looking at some of the changes, looking at the shift in allocating resources, obviously housing is a big, big topic for this valley. Childcare, I think, is right up there too for a working individual that's a family person. How might business and community leaders work together even more? Like there's a lot of continuity, I feel, but what's the next level?
Yeah, it, so I was part of One Valley Prosperity Project, which is kind of how our tourism prosperity project name came. And that was one of the few community efforts I've ever been part of where a bunch of people put a bunch of plans together and then actually executed on the plans. And that's unique, okay? Because I've been through processes here prior where a lot of brain cells were burned and a lot of time was burned and the report was finally done and it went on the shelf and it collected dust and nothing happened. And I think so, and we're still meeting with OVPP, although I forget what we're calling it now, but it's the same crew of people trying to follow up on the same objectives, and that's where the ICE Lab, and economic development came from, right? Is to put another economic leg on the stool of the valley besides Western and tourism. Um, uh, I think I'm good buddies with Ian Billick, who's the mayor of CB now, and this community compass that they're going through. That's not good. He's not going to let that sit on the shelf. He's going to start executing on that, and I think I think we're blessed with some pretty good community leadership right now. Our commissioners, and there are bosses ultimately at TAP. But I'll say, we've got a top-notch crew, and we're recognized throughout the state as having a top-notch crew. This goes back years. When I'm at the CTO or OREC, or I'm in the OEDIT building, which is, 4 or 5 times a year probably, our guys are recognized. Jonathan and John Messner, who's no longer here, I think soon Liz, and now Laura, have a lot of respect. Honestly, it's like the little engine that could. We're not the biggest, most important valley. We got some real political leadership talent here, and I think it doesn't mean we don't have problems here, but that recognize these partnerships are, and that the private sector could be part of the solution and isn't the problem. And an example now would be what's going to happen in housing, right? So if they took 40% of our 3.5 million bucks, whatever that is, 1.8 million, that doesn't buy any housing. That's a lever to get housing built. And I think they prepped the site for Gary Gates' project down in Gunnison, which everybody seems to love so much, and Gary delivered the goods. But I think they brought water and sewer and graded the property, and he said, "I'll take it from there." And so that's a trick that they're going to need to repeat if we're going to see real progress made with what little money. It's big for us, but it's little in the scope of what it costs to build a 20-unit building. Now, it's a lot. Our money's not going to do it. And so they need to look for partners. And I think they'll find some.
That's awesome. For folks that want to reach out, either get involved or connect with you, how might we connect with TAP and John Norton.
Yeah, I think that we have most of our meetings at the ice lab, and so that's an easy place to stop by. And if people haven't been to the ice lab, which is on the western campus, kind of up the hill a bit from the football field, uh, they can drop by anytime. My website or my email and my phone number are on the the Gunnison Crested Butte.com website, which is our tourism and relocation website. But I'm easy to get a hold of, and I think all of us are. So,
John, I really appreciate the conversation. I appreciate your time. As we close, do you have any final words for the day?
no, I'm terribly excited about the future. I think the world is getting better in almost every way. Our valley is much better to live in than when I moved here in 1985. Again, it doesn't mean there aren't problems and stuff to fix, but it's just, you know, the trails are better, the skiing's better, the libraries are better, the schools are better. We have a high school in the North Valley. We have a radio station. It's just, amazing if people stop and reflect on what was and what is now. It's just a better place in almost every way I can think of. And I'm so grateful to live here, and I hope other people feel the same. And I think most do.
I'm grateful for your time. Thank you very much, John. Enjoy a great day.
All right, I will, Matt. Thanks.